Salutations, every pup, and welcome to Chapter 26 of the one they call Broccoli by Texiliaz. As always, the link to the fic will be in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's jump on into it. Chapter 26. Positively Grandfatherly. Chapter Summary. Izuku wakes up the next morning, not really knowing what to expect after the whole spectacle from last night. Just what does Gran Torino have planned for the rest of his internship now that he knows the truth of Izuku's quirk? Author's notes. Hello, everyone. Sorry it's been so long. I have no excuse. Anyway, hope you enjoy this extra fluffy chapter. Trigger warning. The vestiges being gremlins. Slight panic attack, but not too graphic or bad. Extreme fluff! Izuku's point of view. His phone alarm rang at 6 a.m., jolting Broccoli awake from his restless sleep. With a groan, Broccoli turned back into a human and he threw a hand out and turned off his phone's alarm. Needless to say, after his little reveal just a few hours ago, Izuku had not gotten much sleep, and he certainly was not looking forward to facing the man. He was pretty sure the elder would keep his word about not telling anyone, but he still wasn't entirely sure what to expect. Anger, most likely. His mentor would probably use some extra harsh training as a sort of punishment, unless he decided Izuku wasn't worth his time and simply threw him out. Izuku shook his head. It was way too early for these kinds of depressing thoughts. Besides, he highly doubted the man would throw Izuku out as long as he was connected to Nana. As far as he could tell, the two of them seemed really close, and the man probably wanted to spend more time talking to her, if nothing else. There was suddenly a knock on the door, and startling Izuku out of his thoughts, and he let out a shrill, yeah? To show he was awake. Time to get up, brat. Hurry and meet me downstairs. Izuku flinched at the annoyed tone, and he let him know he would be down in a second. Only when he heard footsteps descending down the stairs did he let himself breathe. He was not looking forward to today. Nana appeared next to him and gave him a kind smile. You don't have to be scared, you know. I know we kind of painted a picture of this strict and ruthless teacher, but Sadahiko is a real softie. Somehow, Izuku found that really hard to believe. Grumbling out a half a reply, Izuku stood up and stretched, sighing as some of the tension left his body. He looked himself over before deciding he might as well go downstairs in the same shorts and t-shirts he had been sleeping in. After all, his mentor did not specify that he got changed into his hero suit, and these were comfy. He was just about to head to the door when he remembered something, and he turned back to grab his phone, thinking he might as well charge it while they train. Only, he couldn't find his charger? At first, he thought it might have fallen down to the bottom of the bag, so he started emptying its contents, even going so far as to turn the whole thing upside down. But when the last shirt fell out of the bag, and there was still no charger in sight, he felt dread fill his very being. All at once, everything came to a stop, and Izuku suddenly felt like crying when he realized that he must have forgotten his charger at his dad's place. Panic started settling in at the idea of losing his one way to contact everyone he knew. Izuku barely has any money of his own, so it's not like he can afford to buy a new one either. But there was also the risk of his dad's finding it while he was gone. Something he really didn't want to dwell on for too long. Seriously, how could he have been so stupid? Distantly, he felt a hand settle on his shoulder, as well as the distressed voice of the vestiges telling him to breathe, which, after a few failed attempts, he somehow managed to do. You okay, kiddo? Nana asked from beside him. Not trusting his voice, all Izuku could do was give a small nod, even though he obviously felt far from okay right now. It's probably fine, right? He thought, taking another shaky breath before standing up on trembling legs. After all, it's plugged in at such a hard place to find that they haven't noticed it in years. Surely they won't find it during this 1 week I'm not there. He glanced down at the phone laying innocently in his hand. It was already less than 60%. At this rate, even if he made sure to use it as little as possible, it wouldn't last more than 2 or 3 days. Following his gaze down to his phone, Nana sighed. Why don't you explain to Sorahiko? Maybe he has an extra charger that fits, or he could buy you a new one? I'm sure he wouldn't mind, she suggested gently, still hovering close to his side. Inside his head, the others agreed. With a tired sigh, Izuku shook his head. No, I don't want to trouble him. Or admit how stupid I am for forgetting something as simple as packing a damn cable, he thought bitterly. As if she could sense what he was thinking, which, to be fair, she probably could, Nana looked at him in clear worry. Izu, it's fine, Izuku cut her off, forcing himself to stand a bit taller before moving to put everything back into his bag. I don't use it much anyway, so as long as no one tries to call me, then it's not like anyone will notice, right? With that said, Izuku turned the device fully off and put it in his bag, deciding that he would only turn it back on in case of any emergencies. He really hoped, prayed, that no one would try to reach him while it was turned off. Took you long enough. I was starting to think you had run away or something. Izuku faltered in his footsteps as he walked down the stairs, glancing over at the grumpy man sitting in the kitchen. He had just started to wonder if it would look weird to simply retreat back upstairs and hide under the covers when he felt a hand on his back, urging him forward. Come on, kiddo. He doesn't bite, I promise, Nana told him gently. With that small encouragement, Izuku swallowed nervously and continued walking down the stairs. Sorry, I was just, looking for something, he said, trailing off as he sat down across from his mentor of the week and avoided all eye contact. Anyway, so what is the plan for today? He asked, eager to get started with training and hoping with his whole being that the man would not bring up the whole cat thing. Gran Torino huffed, and Izuku did his best not to shrink into himself. For now? The retired hero asked, and Izuku waited for him to continue, only to grow anxious when the man stood up from his seat and walked away. Worried he had said something wrong, Izuku glanced up, an apology already at the tip of his tongue, only to nearly jump out of his skin when a bowl was loudly placed in front of him, followed by other utensils. We eat, the man continued, as he placed various food items on the table before sitting back down in his seat. Izuku blinked at him in confusion. That's it? No jumping right into training? No lecture about lying about my quirk? No discussions? Just breakfast? Gran seemed to notice how Izuku hadn't moved, and he huffed again. Well, come on. Help yourself out, the man said gruffly, while he made himself a bowl of cereal. Izuku could have sworn he heard him grumble something along the lines of, God knows you need it, you are way too damn skinny, seriously, what the hell have those two been feeding you? Deciding not to address the obvious jab against his dad's or his diet, Izuku instead busied himself with preparing some breakfast. Although Gran told him to help himself, Izuku wasn't sure what he was actually allowed to eat. After all, this might as well be some sort of test, and he really didn't want the man to be even more upset with him. Choosing what to eat really shouldn't be such a difficult decision, but it felt like he was walking through a minefield, where the smallest wrong move would cause the man to blow up at him. Things were much easier when he would simply eat whatever cat food his dad filled his bowl with. In the end, he went with what was probably the safest choice, which was perfectly copying the other and pouring himself a bowl of milk and cereal, copying even the exact amount. Before he ate, Izuku couldn't help but glance over at his mentor, still waiting for the shoe to drop and for the man to snap at him. But Gran simply raised an unimpressed eyebrow at him, and Izuku ducked his head, thanked him for the food, and started eating. They ate in tense silence. Or, at least, that's how it was for Izuku. He had no idea what the retired hero was thinking right now. Nana kept wandering around the house, looking all over the place in obvious curiosity and maybe even nostalgia. Her hand reached out to pick up a photo frame, only for her to phase right through it. She didn't try touching anything else after that. Sometimes, one or two of the others would pop out to join her, but they mostly seemed content staying in his head for now. He had a feeling they were trying to give her some space. Too busy watching Nana flickering around, Izuku didn't notice the way Gran was switching between watching him and the room with an almost sad expression on his face. Somewhere halfway through the meal, Izuku felt the distinct tapping against his left hand, and he looked down to find Nana poking him with an excited grin on her face. Hey, Izu, do you mind if I borrow your hand for a minute? Izuku stared at her for a moment, taking note of the glint in her eyes that promised some sort of mischief. And after the little stunt yesterday, he wasn't completely sure he trusted the Vestiges to take control again. But he was also curious for what had gotten her so excited. Why? He eventually asked. He could practically feel Gran Torino's gaze settle on him, but Izuku paid him no mind and focused on Nana. I just, I thought maybe I could talk with Sorahiko through notes, Nana said, suddenly looking a bit nervous. Despite floating in the air, she was lifting her weight from foot to foot and looking between Izuku and Gran Torino almost pleadingly. Izuku blinked at the suggestion and looked down at his hands. Would that work? Sure, they had managed to change his hero name before by taking over his hand. And oh boy, was he admitting his hero name was Izu still embarrassing. Gran Torino had laughed for a full minute when Izuku told him what happened. But still, taking control for such a long period to write notes? Would that be possible? He hadn't even noticed how long he had been quiet until Nana started fretting next to him. It's completely fine if you don't want to. I just thought it would be a pretty cool idea. You know, instead of taking over and exhausting you. I'm left-handed, so you could keep using your dominant hand. Sure, Izuku found himself agreeing, before he was even aware of it. He had been curious before, but now he was even a little bit excited. Let me just grab some pen and papers, he said, already out of his chair and on his way up the stairs. Kid, Gran Torino called out after him, sounding confused. Sorry, I'll be right back, Izuku answered over his shoulder, not even looking back as he headed up to the attic to get a notebook. When he returned, the elderly man looked torn between curiosity, confusion, and irritation, and Izuku winced when he realized how rude it had been of him to just run off like that. Sorry, Izuku said, shrinking into himself in embarrassment. You apologize too much, brat, Gran Torino rumbled with a roll of his eyes. Now, care to tell me what got you so damn excited? At that, Izuku lit up and he sat back down, laying his open notebook between them and turning it to a blank page. He had expected Nana to disappear and maybe control his hand from inside his mind, but instead, Nana got closer to him and as soon as she grabbed one of his pens, Nana laid her hand over Izuku's own. And as soon as he grabbed one of his pens, Nana laid her hand over Izuku's own. As usual, her fingers phased through the pencil, but Izuku could feel a light, cold pressure where the skin touched. His hand started tingling a little and felt almost numb, and he watched in morbid curiosity as she moved his hand. On the page, in slightly shaky letters, Nana spelled out a simple, "Hello, Sora," before she used Izuku's hand to turn the notebook around for Gran Torino to see. The hero leaned forward to read, and as soon as he did, his eyes widened. He took in a sharp breath and paled, and Izuku got a bit worried that they accidentally had upset him again. But then the man suddenly burst out laughing, the sound raw and kind of scratchy. So that's why you ran off like that, huh? He chuckled between breaths, a giant grin on his face. Izuku politely didn't point out the wetness in the older man's eyes, or the way his voice was wobbling. Instead, he smiled back and gave a shrug before he turned back to finish eating his breakfast. It was surprisingly easy to write while one of your hands was being moved. It was surprisingly easy to eat while one of your hands was being moved around by a ghost. To be honest, he kind of found himself forgetting about it moving in the first place while he let Nana use it to write out random things and talking to her old friend. He was a bit surprised when they suddenly started to include him, too, with Gran asking him stuff about school, and Izuku asking for stories about both them and All Might in return, which they both eagerly told him about. Gran's face had turned devious as he started talking about that moron of a student, and Nana was torn between laughing at the memory and scolding him for the way he had treated her successor. All in all, Izuku was a bit surprised by how nicely it all felt. He should have known not to let himself get too comfortable. So, Gran said, his mouth twisting into a wide grin that Izuku did not trust. You mentioned being Toshinori's house cat. How's that working? The man asked, his grin growing impossibly wider. Izuku groaned and barely managed to resist the urge to slam his head down into the table. Of course the man would ask about that. It's okay, he mumbled, ducking his head in embarrassment and giving a weak shrug. Beside him, Nana let out an amused huff and ruffled his hair. Just okay? Gran asked, and Izuku glanced up to see him raising an eyebrow. But they are treating you all right, aren't they? The man continued, causing Izuku to jolt upright and nod his head so quickly he almost got dizzy. Of course they do, he answered earnestly. The last thing he needed was a man thinking that his dads were mistreating him or something. The retired hero simply chuckled and shook his head. Relax, kiddo. I know how much they dote on their other cat. Slushy, was it? I think it would take a lot before I saw who mistreated an animal, much less a cat. Izuku felt himself relax a little, and he nodded again. Yeah, he can be a bit much, he admitted nervously, feeling his lips tug up at the thought of his family. I seriously thought he would lock me up when he saw the damage on Broccoli's paw after the sports festival. He chuckled, raising his right hand and showing off his scars, and failing to notice the slight frown on the man's face. Nana shook her head at that. To be fair, anyone would freak out if their cat came home with a mangled paw, kiddo, she said with a shake of her head. I think most people would freak out if their damn cat came home with a mangled paw, the man grumbled, causing Izuku to look up in surprise as the hero had repeated Nana's exact words. He felt his lips tug up into a smile, and he heard some of the vestiges laugh from inside his head. Without thinking, Izuku let out a quiet laugh of his own. What's so funny? Oh, sorry. I am not laughing at you, I swear. It's just, well, you and Nana said almost the exact same thing, and I kind of just realized how similar you are. Are you comparing me to this wrinkled old midget? No, that's not what I meant. I'm not calling you a midget anyway. Izuku saw the raised eyebrow and crossed arms of Gran Torino and quickly retreated from his statement. Oh, don't mind me. Please continue, the man said with a grin, as if he knew exactly what he had been about to say. Panicking, all Izuku could think about doing was to point a finger towards Nana and squeak out aloud, Nana said it! Nana gasped and smacked his arm. Izu, how could you? Across from them, Gran let out a loud laugh and shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Shrinking back in embarrassment, Izuku tried desperately to change the subject. So, today's training? Thankfully, his mentor decided to show him mercy, and they started talking about today's training instead. Gran Torino told him about his plans to make sure they trained both of his forms, whatever that meant. From now on, you will take naps during the day instead of sleeping for a full night. It might be tough to turn around your sleep schedule, but we're gonna have to train this other form, and we can't have you passing out while I'm doing it. So, you will train when I tell you to train, and rest when I tell you to rest. Got it, kid? Izuku wasn't sure he got it, but it seemed a bit pointless training a form that he would never use in combat. But he had a feeling that the man wouldn't like that answer, so instead, he nodded. What was that? The hero asked gruffly, raising an eyebrow at him. Yes, sir! Izuku squeaked out, blushing when the vestiges giggled inside his head. Good, let's get started then. Gran Torino started standing up, only to stop and frown down at the table. Confused, Izuku followed his gaze and felt himself freeze at what he saw. And as soon as he read the words written on the page, he shot Nana a betrayed look. The ghost simply shrugged at him, a sheepish but unapologetic smile on his face. You don't have a phone? Gran Torino asked him, standing between him and the message that Nana had written out. Kid doesn't have a working phone and is stubborn. Please help. With a sigh, Izuku moved his hand out of Nana's grip and sank further down in his seat. It still works. I just forgot to bring my charger, but it's fine, because I rarely use it anyway. Besides, I turned it off for now, so I can still use it for emergencies. Gran Torino frowned at him, that disapproving frown that adults would give him whenever he said something wrong, or especially worrisome. That frown that Izuku knew would lead to lectures, questions, anger, or pity. All the things that Izuku absolutely hated. Kid, I'm not gonna ask why you didn't just tell me this, because I'm starting to guess you are used to hiding stuff, the man grumbled before sighing deeply and running a hand down his face. Go get your phone. We'll see if one of my charger fits. But That wasn't a question, kid. Yes? Izuku rushed up the stairs and got the phone, nervously handing it to a still grumbling Gran Torino. The man had dragged out a box of old cables and was swearing as he untangled and tried each of them. Izuku stood off to the side, feeling awfully guilty before moving to put away the dishes. He knew his phone was old, even though it was a smartphone. It was still ancient, barely functioning other than making phone calls and sending messages. It was the same one that he got from his parents when he started elementary school. The only phone he had ever had. Come to think of it, he had no idea if they even sold cables for it anymore. God, he really would need to keep better tabs on his charger if that's the case. Well, it seems like I don't have one that fits, Gran Torino muttered behind him. You know what it's called?
We could probably order one online or something.
Gran Torino handed him back the device, and Izuku gratefully pocketed it and turned back to the dishes. No, it's okay. I don't have any money anyway, he said with a shrug, not turning away from the sink.
Then I'll just buy it for you.
No! Izuku burst out, before realizing what he did and curling back into himself. He could practically feel Gran Torino's eyes on him, and he heard a deep sigh.
Jesus, kid, it's just a damn cable. Let me get that for you.
Please, can we drop this? I really don't want you to do that. It's just for a few days anyway. I can manage. I promise to save the battery for emergencies only. He turned around to look at the man, begging him to just drop it. There was that look again. God damn it, Izuku really hated that look. After a long, intense moment of silence, Gran Torino sighed.
Keep the phone off at all times unless we go out on patrol, and if the battery level gets under 15%, you tell me immediately. Got it?
Ezekiel let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding, and he gave the man a relieved sigh. Yes, sir, he answered, feeling himself relax.
Good. Now wipe that smile off your face and grab your costume. Let's get some training done.
The day played out mostly like yesterday had, with Izuku trying to land a hit on Gran Torino, only to faceplant into the floor and walls. And, just like Gran said, they took a few power naps every few hours. Not that Izuku managed to get much sleep, too unused to taking naps in the middle of the day, but he did manage to get some shut-eye, and he felt just a tiny bit more energized afterwards, so maybe it was worth it? When he wasn't napping or training, however, he and Nana spent the time talking with Gran, taking turns answering questions and asking his own.
So, does anyone else know about you being All Might and Eraserhead's pet cat?
Gran asked, causing Izuku to blush a bright red at being called someone's pet. He was their student, not their pet. Well, Nezu knows, as well as Hound Dog and a friend, but other than that, no one knows, he answered with a pout.
I see,
Gran said simply before changing the subject. Unbeknownst to Izuku, the man made a mental note of contacting Nezu later, just to make sure the brat actually had a support system when he got back home. And maybe to also laugh at the absolute stupidity of their former students. In what felt like no time at all, the sun had gone down and it was time for them to start the next part of their training. And while he could understand the day training and why that was necessary, Broccoli wasn't exactly sure what the man wanted from him right now. It was 9 p.m. and they were currently on the bottom floor, facing each other. Gran Torino wore his usual hero uniform, while Broccoli sat on the floor in front of him, only sporting his yellow collar and a confused frown on his fluffy face.
So, you're a cat,
the man said, leaning against the wall behind him. Not really knowing how to answer that, Broccoli just nodded.
And what are you going to do if a villain shows up?
Broccoli's frown deepened, and he huffed, barely managing to not roll his eyes at that ridiculous question because obviously he wouldn't face villains in this form.
Let me guess what you're thinking, Gran Torino grumbled. I'm not planning on facing any villains like this. Is that right?
He asked, and Broccoli nodded with a confused frown that only deepened when Gran Torino barked out a humorless laugh.
Well, tough luck, kid, 'cause the world doesn't care about your plans. Shit happens, and villains can attack whenever and wherever they damn please. So, I ask you again, what are you gonna do?
Broccoli thought for a while before he stood up and took a few steps back, giving the man an uncertain look. To his relief, Gran Torino grinned down at him.
That's right. You get the hell out of there. Glad you are at least smarter than that musclehead Toshi in that regard.
Broccoli frowned at the jab towards his dad, not liking the way the elder spoke about him.
And let's be honest here, that form of yours isn't much for fighting, but I bet you are hella fast like that, right?
Broccoli nodded, unsure where he was going with this.
Good, then let's test it out,
Gran said with a grin and taking a step forward. The cat simply tilted his head in confusion.
What are you waiting for? Just like we've been doing all day. Come at me. Let's see just how much faster you are in that form.
Broccoli hesitated. Other than playing around with Slushy and getting around town, he hadn't really done much in this form, so he couldn't help but feel unsure. Gran Torino crossed his arms and rolled his eyes.
What? Thought you were a damn cat, not a scared chicken.
Finally steeling himself, Broccoli got in position. Well, here goes nothing, he thought before he pounced. At first, he felt unsteady, and he unconsciously held back, until Gran Torino barked at him, telling him to do better. With a growl, Broccoli kicked off the floor, and, without even using one for all, he almost managed to graze the man's leg with his claws. His eyes widened, and he found himself pushing to go even faster. It was remarkable how fast he was like this. As Izuku, even with full cowl, he had barely managed to keep up. No matter how much Izuku tried, it was like Gran Torino was always 3 steps ahead of him. But as Broccoli, tiny, weak, and useless, Broccoli, he actually managed to keep up with the fast hero. He finally managed to swipe at Gran Torino's legs, his claws catching on the material, and before Broccoli could feel bad for the small tear, the elder hero had come to a stop and started laughing. Looking up, he found the hero grinning at him. Broccoli himself was preening at the improvement, feeling proud, and he found himself bumping his head against the hero's leg while letting out a loud purr. The man barked out another laugh.
What? You want me to pet you or something?
That finally snapped Broccoli out of it, and he immediately jumped back and tucked his tail between his legs, embarrassed for losing himself like that. Gran Torino just kept grinning, and before Broccoli could even react, the man reached down to ruffle the fur on his head, purposefully making it even more of a tangled mess than usual.
Nice work, kid. Just don't get too full of yourself. You still have a long way to go,
the man said, grinning at him. Broccoli pouted as he tried to get his curls back under control, but nodded to show he was listening.
So, what do you say? Want to go again?
With a sigh, Broccoli gave up on grooming his fur and stood up, giving the man a determined nod.
Right answer, kid,
Gran Torino grinned before bolting away, and this time Broccoli wasted no time in giving chase. The next morning, they once again ate breakfast together, and just like last time, Izuku made a point of perfectly copying his choice of food to match the man. He noticed Gran Torino watching him, but ignored it as he set up the notebook between them. And just like she had done every chance she got the day before, Nana wasted no time talking to her friend. Some of the other vestiges also ventured out to say hi, though apart from Diagoro, no one made any effort to speak with the other hero. Though Diagoro obviously couldn't give Izuku a single break, because while writing, he had called the older hero Grandpa Torino, which was mortifying. Diagoro! Izuku scolded, his face a dark red as he glared at the laughing ghost. He heard choking and looked up to notice Gran Torino was holding back laughter. The man was covering his mouth with a hand and staring at the notebook with crinkled eyes. He kind of looked like Aizawa did when he ducked his face into his scarf and tried to look mad, but the shaking of his shoulders gave him away.
See? He ain't mad!
Diagoro chuckled proudly as he moved to write something else, but before he could make contact, Izuku removed his hand and glared at him. From now on, until you learn to behave, you are banned from writing, Izuku scolded, causing Diagoro to gasp and all the other vestiges letting out shocked laughs. The man almost looked like a kicked puppy when he tried to reach back. Izuku's glare hardened. Behave! He repeated, making the others laugh even harder. Defeated, Diagoro immediately floated back, muttering out a quiet apology. Izuku avoided looking at his mentor after that, his face still burning with embarrassment. But then Gran Torino cleared his throat and he said,
Did I ever tell you about that time Toshi called me Dad?
Izuku's head whipped up to meet the clearly amused eyes of the older hero, a small grin plastered on his face. And just like that, Izuku felt all of the tension leave his body as he laughed out and let out a surprised, Really? Gran's grin widened.
Yup, during training and in front of the whole class, no less. The brat was so damned embarrassed for weeks. It was hilarious.
Izuku listened as he retold the story, his smile growing wider upon hearing about his dad's high school days. I guess I have a grandpa now? He thought, a warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't until later that night, after Izuku had trained full cowl the whole day, that the unavoidable happened. Broccoli activated one for all. It had been by pure accident. He had simply tried to push himself to go faster when suddenly he felt a rush of energy, and his fur puffed up and seemed to sway in an invisible wind as green sparks danced around his body.
Holy shit, kid!
Gran Torino exclaimed, coming to a full stop and looking down at him in surprise. Panicked, Broccoli froze on the spot. He almost stopped breathing in his fear to move, not wanting to find out if his small body could withstand the power of one for all.
You doing okay there?
Gran asked carefully, and if Broccoli didn't know any better, he'd say he almost looked worried.
Think you can turn it off?
Broccoli frowned down at his body, making sure not to move a single muscle. He had only managed to activate his quirk in this form once before, back when he just got it and saw Yuichi for the first time. but he never really thought about using it. Maybe if I... The vestiges seemed to sense his line of thinking, and panic immediately started flooding their veins.
Kiddo, no!
Izu, don't even think about it!
Don't you dare!
Ignoring the vestiges' frantic warnings, Broccoli hesitantly and very slowly raised a paw before putting it in front of the other and taking a small step forward. Everyone seemed to hold their breath as they waited for him to explode, only to let out a deep sigh of relief when nothing happened. One for all was still coursing through his veins and dancing around his skin, full cowl activated at 5%, but he didn't break anything. In fact, he didn't hurt any worse than he would do while in his human form. Now that he was more confident he wouldn't randomly explode, Broccoli took another step forward, followed by another, before he turned to look up at Gran Torino. The man was staring at him, eyes as wide as dinner plates. Broccoli just tilted his head at him and meowed, which seemed to snap him out of it as he shook his head.
Jesus Christ, kid,
Gran Torino said, letting out a deep sigh.
You're just full of surprises, aren't you?
He chuckled. Broccoli huffed out a sound that might have been a laugh, and the vestiges chuckled nervously, finally seeming to relax again after that small scare.
Well, I guess this means I can finally stop holding back, huh?
Gran Torino said with a grin, and Broccoli rolled his eyes before crouching down into a fighting position.
Let's see how fast you really are.
The answer to that was apparently really fucking fast. After getting used to the extra speed and strength that came with using One for All, and a few faceplants straight into walls and furniture after having missed some sharp turns, Broccoli was practically soaring through the room. It was no longer an issue of keeping up with Gran Torino. Instead, it became a game of outsmarting the other while also dodging Gran Torino's own attacks, once the hero was sure he was fast enough to actually stand a chance to avoid it. Needless to say, it was really fun. Broccoli hadn't even noticed it, but somewhere during training he had started purring. So, imagine his surprise when, in the middle of the chase, Gran Torino barked out a laugh, causing him to come to a stop and tilt his head at the hero in confusion. The vestiges were also sniggering, and Broccoli sat down, looking between them and feeling confused and kind of annoyed because he wanted to keep running and he wanted to do it now. For some reason, that thought only caused the vestiges to laugh harder.
Holy shit, kid. Sorry for laughing at you, but you really are a cat, huh?
Gran Torino chuckled, and Broccoli frowned up at him. Yes? Was there any doubt? Broccoli felt his tail twitch in annoyance, and he walked up and booped a paw against the man's leg before jumping back, trying to get him to start playing, again. Come on! Let's go already! The hero grinned and muttered something under his breath that sounded awfully like, damn, this kid is cute, before they finally went back to running. Later, Izuku would curl up under his covers and almost die from embarrassment once he realized how he had acted. And the vestiges would take full advantage of it and tease him horrendously. Thursday morning arrived, and Izuku had kind of expected the day to play out like other ones. But Gran Torino apparently had other plans.
Hey, kid, is it possible for you to somehow change the time you switch form, so you are human during the night instead of the day?
Izuku paused where he was chewing his breakfast and thought for a while before answering. I guess if I force myself to use my cat form a lot during the day, I can get a couple of hours as a human later during the night. Why? Gran Torino grinned before slamming a map down on the table, causing the plates and silverware to shake.
We are going out on patrol this evening. Your cat form can read, right? Here's a map of the area. Make sure to memorize everything within the circle before then.
He straightened out the map and looked it over. The map was huge, showing the entirety of Tokyo, with one district in particular marked. Shibuya? He asked, glancing between the marked area and the hero. And why at night? Wouldn't it be better to go during the day when I'm human?
Most crime happens at night. Wouldn't be much of a patrol if we just strolled down the streets like some glorified clowns.
Izuku pouted at the jab towards Limelight heroes, but didn't say anything as he just listened.
Now, go on. We are leaving in a few hours. I'll be in my office making a few calls if you need me,
Gran said, already grabbing Izuku's now empty plate and moving it to the sink before he could protest. With a sigh, Izuku changed form. Broccoli jumped up on the table with a slight wince. Going over his time limit wasn't, as far as he knew, harmful, but it also definitely didn't feel particularly good. Even so, he would have to just plow through. Especially if he ever wanted to work underground. He would have to get used to the strain of changing his time for missions. Determined, Broccoli eyed the map, making sure to memorize the streets and trying to figure out the most likely routes with highest crime. It wasn't that different from what Nezu would sometimes have Izuku do during their private lessons, and he found himself easily slipping into the routine. After going through the district for the fourth time and having memorized most of what he believed would be the most important routes, he finally felt himself starting to grow bored. Glancing over at the clock showed he still had over half an hour to spare, and he suppressed the urge to sigh. He was so used to Nezu giving him tests like these, but on those tests, he only had a few minutes to do them, so he wasn't sure what to do with all the free time. He supposed he could tell Gran Torino that he was done, but then maybe the hero thought he didn't take it seriously or something. Not wanting to risk looking bad or upsetting the hero, Rockley started looking through the other areas as well. His eyes kept glancing over to Hosu, and his stomach twisted with worry for Ida. He still felt bad for not talking to him before they headed out to their internships. He hoped he was doing okay. Shaking his head, Broccoli again focused on memorizing the streets. This time, solely focusing on Hosu and trying, and failing, to keep his mind away from his friend. Izuku stared at the bag in Gran Torino's hand, with said man looking up at him expectantly. Why? He eventually asked.
To save ticket money, obviously, Gran answered with a grin. And to save your time. It's better that you use it for when it really matters.
Which, okay, sure. That was true, but also, seriously?
Now, come on, give me your stuff. We don't have all day, the mentor said,
tapping his foot impatiently against the floor.
I'll give it back once we arrive at Shibuya.
With a sigh, Izuku did as he asked, taking off his shoes, gloves, and utility belt, things he had told Gran Torino was too heavy for him to transform with. He really should consider getting a lighter costume, not liking the idea that he would have to walk around barefoot and weaponless in case he ever transformed. Once he was done, he stood barefoot, only wearing the tracksuit of his uniform, one of his knives strapped to his thigh, and his mouth guard round his neck. Gran Torino raised an eyebrow at him, as if asking, well? Inside his mind, the vestiges were stirring. With yet another sigh, Izuku transformed into his cat form, before walking over to Torino and jumping down into the bag, being mindful of some of the sharper weapons that were stored there.
Comfy?
Gran asked, and Broccoli resisted the urge to roll his eyes, instead nodding up at his mentor.
Good. Let's go on your first patrol then, shall we?
The man chuckled and gave him a pat on the head, deliberately messing up his fur before Broccoli swatted away his hand, causing the man to laugh some more. Sulking, Broccoli simply ducked his head into the bag, growling under his breath. He just hoped he would get through his first patrol without too much trouble. Broccoli was a bit worried about getting onto the train, especially when it became clear that Gran Torino really had no plan whatsoever to pay for him, instead seemingly intending to sneak him on board, which honestly seemed a bit unheroic. Whatever. At least they managed to get onto the train without any problems. Once they were on board and the train was moving, Gran opened the bag and let him know the coast was clear. At first, Broccoli ducked further into the bag, too scared of getting caught to even dare look up. But then, curiosity got the better of him, and he cautiously stuck his head out of the bag. He had been on trains as a cat before, but those times he had been alone and hidden underneath the seats, trying to stay as far away from curious eyes and grabbing hands as possible. This time, however, the cart was almost completely empty, and he was seated inside the bag resting on Gran's lap, with a perfect view out of the window. And what a view it was! Eyes filled with wonder, Broccoli sat up straighter and stared out at the city lights under the night sky. They were traveling high above the ground, and as far as his eyes could see, there were high buildings and lights decorating the horizon. He hadn't even noticed he had started to purr until Gran Torino laughed next to him.
It's quite a view, huh?
Not turning away from the window, Broccoli nodded. He was so distracted by the view that he didn't even notice the sound of Gran Torino snapping a picture before sending it to a certain principal, who would look at the picture with a smile. The train ride was peaceful, and Broccoli spent most of the time staring out the window, watching everything passing them by at seemingly the speed of light. The only times he would move was when they reached a station, and he quickly ducked inside the bag to hide, paranoia taking over. But much to his relief, their cart remained mostly empty. He crawled back out of the bag and looked outside. They were entering the big city now, the buildings having grown taller and closer. On the intercom, he could hear them announce the next stop being Hosu, and he immediately started to think about Ida again. But then his nose twitched from the distinct smells of smoke, and he frowned, a bad feeling in his gut. Is something burning? His ears twitched. picking up the sound of fire, as well as the sudden and terrified screaming in the far-off distance. Without wasting another second, Broccoli leaped out of the seat and transformed back into a human, startling the pro hero and handful of passengers that were in their cart.
Kid?
Gran Torino started to ask, but Izuku didn't let him finish as he grabbed his stuff and quickly started to pull on his shoes, cursing the laces as he struggled to hurry and tie them. "Something's wrong," was all Izuku managed to say, halfway through fastening his belt before his danger sense started to go off. Something was coming. Something bad! He had just finished pulling on his gloves when something crashed right into their cart, tearing a giant hole into its side.
What the hell?
Gran Torino yelled. Izuku whipped around, turning to face the threat, only to feel his blood turn to ice at the sight of a Nomu. "Oh no," Izuku choked out, just as the monster roared and Torino went for the attack, leaving Izuku with the instruction to stay put. And of course, Izuku didn't listen. Instead, he jumped right out after them and into the burning city of Hosu. Next up, Hero Killer Stain versus... Bonus, was bored and made this. Lol, hope you like it. Which you'll have to go to the chapter to check this out, but it's a picture of Gran Torino holding broccoli in a little bag. It's actually really well drawn and cute. Oh my god, that's so cute. Anyway, author's notes. I know a lot of you have wanted panther or giant wildcat broccoli, and I did consider going there, but I've already seen that a few times in other fics, and as much as I love it, I just found it much more funny with him having this tiny powered-up kitten. I just found it much more funny with having this tiny powered-up kitten beating the living crap out of villains, lol. So sadly, no, we won't have a giant broccoli in this story. Imagine, I'ma keep him tiny, yet terrifying. For clarification! Since a lot of the story has been based on my own experiences from having DID, I just wanted to clarify that the whole ghostwriting scene was entirely fictional and inspired by paranormal investigation stuff. I've never experienced anything like it. I just wanted to make that clear. As always, thank you everyone for the continued love and support. I am so happy that so many of you still enjoyed this silly story, and every comment literally makes my day. Hugs, all of you. Hope you all have a wonderful day or night wherever you are in the world. And that is a wrap on chapter 26. I'm so happy. This was such a great chapter. It was so much fun. I feel like I was reading really fast there at the end. So I might own 2x speed. Yay! Anyway. Sorry for mistakes. They're inevitable. I keep them in because it shows I'm human. So y'all are just gonna learn to deal with them. I really hope that this chapter doesn't glitch. I don't know what's happening with the audio glitching. I think it's something wrong with Adobe. And I can't use CapCut anymore because it decided to freaking lock me out. And so I can't log into CapCut to use that software. And now Adobe's starting to go bad, so I'm going to have to find an entirely new software. But hopefully the glitching isn't that bad, if there is any glitching at all. Hopefully there's no glitching. I'm ranting. Please go show the original author Texiliaz some love, and please leave me a comment. I love reading your comments. They make me so happy. They can literally be any comment. I will heart hate comments. I will. I'll do it. Test me. Write a hate comment down there. Hate on me. I'll go heart it. All that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will see you next time. Bye-bye, pups.